in a town where whispers roam. A wolf-turned man found a place called home. Sunlight streams through the window panes. A cozy bookstore where magic reigns. Pages turn with every heart's desire, filling the air with tales that inspire. By day it's quiet, the world feels still, but as dusk falls, it's time for the thrill. When the sun goes down and the stars ignite, the wolf among us comes alive at night. Friends gather round with laughter and cheer. In the heart of the stories we hold our dear. Games on the table, love and delight. In this little bookstore, everything's right. He weaves the stories of distant lands, with creatures that play in the palm of his hands. The whispers of legends fill the room. From dragons to dreamers, the shadows bloom. In the laughter we forget our fears, sharing our hopes, the dreams of our years. The flicker of candles, the warm glow inside. In the embrace of tales, we let love guide. When the sun goes down and the
Okay. The trivia question, I really hope people know the answer to it, because it's very quotable. Let me introduce you to my little friends! Anyway. I'd say half the movie they don't even call him Antonio, that just goes to Tony. I may see if I can get some other ones put together. I'd really like to be able to hire someone to do actual songs instead of these AI generated ones. But that would involve money, and I sure the hell don't make any streaming. I think I might get 50-minute. Well, I don't even know how much I'm getting this month. Yeah, I'm not even going to make the budget this month, so. But yeah, I like the music. And as I said, I went through a lot of them and chose individual ones out of it that I got for free, so I don't feel guilty about not paying for them. But I just wish the original ones I'd gotten had been like full tracks, not cut off randomly. But yeah. I would advertise the site, because if I refer people, I get like 2 more song credits. And with Songer, you actually get to keep the copyright on the music as opposed to other AI generated ones. But again, I would really love to be able to pay someone to write music someday. I mean, I like my theme songs, but still. But we are going back to the cowboy biography tonight, since we didn't do it last week, because last week was my birthday, and I felt like playing games instead. So now I'm a week older than my birthday, so yeah. Anyway, we're in this book. Oh, good, the cat is still showing up. So all my sound alerts and everything else pop up over the cat cam on this one. So if anything happens, it'll be over the cats, which, you know, as you can see, no one's on the blanket. Let's see, the chapters we went over last time. Hey, Doctor! Welcome in. How is your stream? I apparently need to change Kel's listing. But how is Expedition 33? Pretty good. Just getting started and having... Ooh, there's actually the Wild West Outlaw one. Let's switch to that. Pretty good. Got coffee and may or may not have alcohol in it. I think I've got everything marked now. So I keep forgetting to change the genres of which ones I'm doing. Alright, get food. Oh, yes, mental preparation for work is a good thing from what I hear. I don't know, it's been 4 years, I think. Yeah, 4 years. Because I got fired 2 days before my 45th birthday. Which generally sucked. But still, we're here, we're streaming. Yeah, have a good night, get food, get sleep. Why would I have booze in it? I mean, if I'm reading cowboy stories, why would I not have whiskey in my coffee? Just because Byrd Cochrain didn't drink doesn't mean I don't. Let's see, we made it for the first 3 chapters, so we got to hear about 2 of the outlaws that he was acquainted with. And all this time when he's at the Triple D Ranch. So, if you ready, feel free, set one. Oh, I want to redo his shout out. What do we come up with this time, Kill? There we go. Now it's Western. Howdy, partner. This here Tanuki VTuber's rustling up a storm of gaming frontier. They ain't just playing games, they're singing and pixel painting too. This town ain't big enough for the 2 of us if you can't handle their first playthroughs of all kinds of games. I need to change that. No. Oh well. Yeah, I prefer the Western shoutouts. I mean, I need Western shoutouts for Cowboy Night, so. It is 9:10, so let's get into the reading. Slow your retreat, but sure as dawning, leaving but memories, strive as you may. Looms the abyss of eternity's yawning into its maw and forever away. Yes, there's parts of poems before each one of these chapters. Because I would not come up with that on my own. Anyway. Chapter 4. Fired from the DDD. As for myself, during my stay with the DDD, I never branded a brood of any kind, but I roped many a good one for the other fellow to put the hot iron to. I was only a kid then working for the other man, and I had to face the stark realities of life at a very tender age. I heard a lot and saw a lot, but said little. I was getting an education, but not from books. Dad tried to get me to come back and finish school, but I was destined to wander. I rode bad horses for extra money to send to them. I killed fur-bearing mammals in the winter while their furs were good and sold them and kept nothing out for myself. Then at night I sang songs to the cowboys and played the fiddle, as I had learned to play by listening to Dad. Once I quit the outfit and went back home to try to go to school. Dad was able to work again, and he begged me to come back and study. Things were changed. I had been gone 3 years, and a shirt-tailed kid like myself couldn't see that learning was important. I quickly began to resent Mother's advice, and wouldn't tolerate my sister's quick tongues about my lack of manners and my bad language. Soon Dad saw I was determined to make my own way. There was no turning back to the plow, and it was seemingly too late for the books. He called me to the cowpen one day after Mother had tongue-lashed me good for my profane language, which she wasn't supposed to have heard. He told me then he could see I was a cowboy through and through. He said, "You left home just a lad to help us, but almost overnight you had grown up and made your own way. I will never ask you to come back and go to school." That was the day he set me free of my obligations towards the family, and I continued to send money. The DDD back then was a hard name, and Mother tried to tell me of all the bad influence I was coming in contact with. I tried to assure her that I was not influenced by the men I was forced to associate with. I left home, but with a saddened heart. I joined up with the wagon boss, Bob Eichard, who took a personal liking to me. I loved the land and the territory. The Comanche territory was one of the best grazing countries at that time, but since has become one of the garden spots of the world. Its dark sandy soil with its dark red clay formed foundation makes it an ideal country for most any crop. Its prairie branches, clothed in a luxurious growth of timber, and in some parts streaks of level prairie, covered with timber, and the open prairie make it a sight to behold. The chain of mountains running east and west through it makes it picturesque as well as valuable and fertile. One day, while I was riding the pasture fence that had the thoroughbred mares in it, I saw a mare by herself, and she seemed to be looking down most of the time. I went to see why she wasn't with the other mares and colts, and when I was within 100 yards of her, she left and went to the others. I went to where she had been, and there was a newborn colt in a 4-foot hole. I got him out, and he followed my horse to the ranch. The boss and I pinned the mares and put the colt with its mother. She wouldn't claim it. She wouldn't let it nurse. I was told to kill the colt and let its mother go back to the bunch. I asked for permission to try to raise the little fellow on the bottle for my own. No one thought the colt would live, and permission was granted. It was a blue roan in color and a real thoroughbred. I babied the little thing and got him on his feet. I had 2 fine horses now of my own. The territory all around was opened for the settlement. The big cattlemen were moving their stock out of the country. Wagoner had bought many thousands of acres in Wilbecker, Wichita, Baylor, and Hardin counties, and was fast moving cattle there. We worked hard almost day and night. I had grown to be 5 feet 6 inches tall and weighed 140 pounds. I was a healthy, active young man and supremely happy in the open air. I was content in spite of my old lofty existence. I saw many changes taking place in the land, but all things must change for progress. I did not want to see the cattle penned in. It was a struggle for me to find my place at times. While at work one day, Bob told me that old Nestor, who lived near the Red River, had 3 unbranded calves that were weaned from their mothers. He wanted me to go down and help them across the river. Then the boys from the ranch could pick them up the next morning. I knew that he wasn't doing anything uncommon, but I remembered another Nestor a few years back who lost all his cattle in such a way. I remembered, too, a small sprat of a boy trying to keep the cowboys from rounding them up as strays. I didn't want to go. I told him if he didn't have any other kind of work for me to do, I would just get my bedding and drift. He looked at me in complete surprise. I will not steal to hold my job, I told him flatly. So stepping high as a rooster in mud, I gathered up my gear and moved on. I knew I could find work of some kind, for I was far from lazy. I worked next for a man for $2 a day, pitching hay and cooking. It was while I was at his farm that I met Buck Beckingham, Joe's brother, and Dave Tidwell. I made a few extra dollars among the farmers riding some of their workhorses and mules that they thought were bad. These 2 bachelors would make up a purse and see me wipe 'em out, as they called it. It would be told around that I would ride a certain horse at Sunday, and people would show up to see the little bronc buster at work. I was often referred to as a kid from the Comanche territory. I would get anywhere from $2.50 to $15, according to the size of the crowd and the reputation of the horse I was to ride. I would ride with circle or with a saddle, and at any amount I could ride either way. Buck Beckham and Dave both liked to gamble and drink. Old Dave would work all day for a quart of Hill and Hill. Buck began to drink heavily after Joe's untimely death, but both men made good partners. When they introduced me to anyone, they had a favorite story or two to tell. They told how I could ride a steer just as well as a horse. When the opportunity afforded itself, I would ride up by the side of a steer, jump from my well-trained horse's back to the back of the steer, light upon his back where his hips come up to the backbone, hook my spurs deep into his flanks, and rear back. This always brought loud cheers from the crowd. Buck and Dave knew how to draw the people. Dave would tell our friends about the time I was riding in the lead of 3,000 herd of stampede big biff steers. My horse stepped into a prairie dog hole, turned a catapult in the air, and threw me clear from him in front of the surging, frightened herd. Before my horse could get up, the steers were stumbling over him, he would say. A big steer that was the lead picked me up and carried me to safety upon its back until my companion could make his way to the lead of the herd, and after the steers had run themselves down, he took me from the back of the panting steer, hatless and without my 6-shooter. To show my skill with the rope, one of my partners would run his horse at full speed at me, and I would catch any foot or any 2 feet of the horse that anyone asked me to catch. Usually we got an invitation to supper after the shows. Since Buck was a good singer, we were given jobs for entertaining the children. I told my children stories in the way and the territory of the strange ways of the Indians. I showed them how to talk Comanche Sign Language. All the Beckhams were musically inclined, but Buck made up many of his own songs. While driving a herd to Dodge years before I knew him, he made up a song he called Get On, Little Doggy. That song has many different versions to it now, but it was picked up by the ranches by different cowboys and passed on. He also wrote what he called the Sunday School March, and his brother Jim and wife Katie used to play that song to their 2 children for evening entertainment in the home. I loved Buck in those days. He was good to every kid he saw. I can still remember how he patted them on the head and just happened to have a stick of candy when he saw a little tot. He would tell the crowds we gathered about how I left my home at the age of 12 to help Dad feed the kids back home. He knew I was fired from the DDD because I wouldn't steal from poor nesters. He knew how to draw a big crowd. Old-timers who remember the Beckham boys, or remember hearing their parents talk, have many good things to say. Most of the folks in Matador felt Joe Beckham was railroaded about the county funds for political gain. I heard of Joe many times from Buck, who grieved all his days about his baby brother as he did the other boys. In the words of Lula Beckham Cates, Jim's daughter, Uncle Buck was a favorite of the family in spite of his weakness for liquor. Joe was our baby uncle. Roderick Carroll Beckham Jr. was much like his hot-headed grandfather who went to the Civil War from Nashville. He acquired the name Buck in a very odd way. Very few folks ever knew he had another name. When he was about 6 years old, the Yankees used to go marching by their house, which sat on a hill. The front yard gate was part of the big tree that the Buck heard the Yankee soldiers coming, and he would run to perch himself on top of the flat-topped gate post and began cursing the first Yankee who came in sight, and cursed them until the last one disappeared over the hill. The soldiers thought this was very funny from such a little boy, so they began to yell at him as soon as they were within hearing distance, "Hello, Buck!" And he would curse even louder then. Buck's brothers teased him unmercifully about every girl he had. Then he would drop the young lady to get the brothers quiet. He never married, and often Jim and John would say they should have left him alone. They felt Buck would have left off the drunk had he married and had a family. He died in 1914 at John's home, helplessly addicted. In 1900, Buck decided he wanted to go to the Klondike, but when he learned of the expensive equipment, $500, he would have had to have, he abandoned the idea. He was at our house in Frost, Texas, when he decided to roam again, and the picture of him as he strode across the green cotton fields on the Hoosier farm is just as vivid in my mind as if it were looking at the same scene this morning. I never again saw my dear uncle alive. He returned to that country in 1912, but I was living in Richland at the time, and people didn't get around then as they do now. Mom and I went to his funeral. He is buried in a country cemetery in the middle of a Hoosier farm at the east side of Ellis County, between Frost and Italy, Texas, just off the road. Mrs. Clay Blindley, Dave's sister, kept all my winnings for me so I wouldn't lose it or get it stolen. I stayed with her when I wasn't working. She proved to be a good friend to me later. I used to wait on her or the children any time they got sick. I ran errands for her. I also waited on Buck many times when the juice got the better of him. When all the work was done, Mr. Lindley had to let his hands go. I was the last to leave. It was near Christmas, and I decided to visit home. I had some $1,500 in bills and about 90 of them in silver. I wanted to save my money and watch the happy glow on the face of my mother when I handed it to her. It was to be their nest egg, and I was proud of myself for having been able to give it to them. I knew the girls would finish school, and Dad could buy himself some farming equipment. Many times I thought of all that I could do with such money. I'd ridden many a bad horse to get that extra money. So I headed for home with joy in my heart. I went a mile west of town and camped and fed my horses. I'd fancied daydreams of how glad they would be to see me. I thought my mother weeping because I had brought prosperity to them at last. I was a little over 15, so I knew Dad would have just shaken my hand and hold tightly. These dreams were short-lived. When I reached home, I went into the house through the back door into the kitchen. I tried to be quiet, but the silver in my bag made considerable noise. Mother rushed in from her bedroom, and when she saw the money, her face turned ashen. With money I'd been sending home, Dad had bought a house. "Son, where did you get it?" Mother cried. Her hand flew to her mouth in utter dismay. Dad rushed into the kitchen. He, too, looked at the money, then exclaimed, "Take it back. I won't rest a minute with that kind of money here." "Take it back," Mother added, "to where it belongs." She sat down in a kitchen chair and began to rock back and forth with her arms folded. I began to try to tell my family where I'd gotten the money and how, but neither would listen. Neither my mother nor my dad believed me. The other kids came in and heard me being accused. I was hurt considerably over their lack of trust and embarrassed that they had let my sisters and brothers hear. I suppose it was the first time I actually faced the fact that they considered me a ruffian and unfit. I sat down at the table and fought back childish tears. I looked at my earnings as I racked my hand across the table and dumped the money back into my sack. A tear had to fall. My lips quivered as I thought of those sickening daydreams. How I longed for their approval and acceptance of me. I've been lonely many times in my life, but the hurt was never as acute as it was then. They had all lost faith in me, for no reason at all. I spoiled what might have been a happy Christmas for them by returning. Dad paced the floor most of the night. I could not sleep, and after the hurt subsided a bit, I began to resent the fact that I hadn't been given a chance to explain. I went out to the place where I'd staked my 2 horses and sat on the ground. First I kicked at the dirt with my boot heel, and then I lay face down and cried out. I let self-pity rule for the first time that night. I kept remembering how I had left home to help supplement the income so that others could eat, go to school, and wear good clothes. I thought of the mean horses I'd ridden, the furs I had sold, the sacrifices I had made. At some unknown time between heavy sobs, I fell asleep on my slicker. The next day I wrote to Mr. Lindley and asked that he write my parents. I asked him to tell them how I earned the money. I told him my folks thought I'd stolen it. Soon a letter came from Mrs. Lindley to my mother. She told Mother what a fine young man she thought I was, and that I would never steal or lie. She told her many of the times I cared for her children, and about the errands I used to run for them. Dave wrote that he would be down to visit me in a week or 2. He said Buck had wandered over into Denton County. He had been unable to locate him. During the time I waited for Dave, Mother began to upbraid me for betting and riding bad horses. She said I had been playing cards and next I would be drinking. She was sure I would come to no good. Once she told me I would hang before I was grown. After Dave came, the matter was cleared. He stayed a few weeks with us and then went his way, and I never saw him again. By spring, I was more than ready to move on. I had become shockingly aware of the fact that I no longer fit in my family's social realm. I packed my belongings and headed for New Mexico. I was tired of having my table manners criticized, and my sisters teased me about my shabby clothes. I was an embarrassment to them. I must admit I had picked up the cursing habit. Mother would fly into me for being abusive around the girls. I didn't like the tame life I was expected to live around at home. My final decision to move on came when my mother brought a preacher around. I came home one evening with a load of wood and a cowhide on the wagon. Dad introduced me to the preacher. I stuck my blood-stained hand out for a shake, but he suggested we wait. I laughed and drew back my paw, wiping the blood down the leg of my jeans. And I went about my business. By night he commenced to lecture me about going to New Mexico. I knew Mother had been talking to him. She had felt he might talk some sense into an empty head. What she didn't know was that I had already met the preacher 5 years ago. He was a hijacker, a gambler of the lowest sort, and a few other things it takes to be one of the really bad men. I found it hard to see any reform in him. Probably I wasn't looking. He was called Morefoot. He weighed about 250 pounds and stood 6 feet and 9 inches tall, and was about 16 inches of the small end of his leg turned down to walk on. He had the largest hands I've ever seen. He was known in those parts as a giant preacher. I sat and listened and never said a word until I'd put some wood on the stove and happened to knock a few coals of fire onto the floor. I picked them up with my fingers and dropped them into the hearth. Moore said, "You're trying to get used to the fire, are you, before you go to hell?" Then he snickered. I looked him right in the eyes, unsmiling. He had gone too far. "Don't you remember me?" I asked him bluntly. "Don't you remember seeing me at Sutter's Line Camp on a certain night in August of '96? "No, I was in those parts, but don't place you, kid." I helped jog his memory. I watched him turn pale as I talked. "Remember a small boy and a fellow named Bill Sutters? I'm that boy. I'm the one who killed the fawn. I saw you and the young boy who came with you and Bill playing cards that night. You cheated him out of his money. The boy caught you. You cursed and cavorted until the boy called your hand and you settled down a bit. I saw you, preacher, ride off with the boy. The next day I came upon him lying face down in the creek. He had been shot in the back as he rode up the bank ahead of you on the trail." I saw the blood on the ground, and the preacher's big footprints plainly where he had squatted beside the boy and emptied his pockets. He dragged him a few feet, then rolled him over on the bank. I buried him as best I could, but I've also seen the giant preacher in Greer County in the white slave business. I may go to hell, preacher, but not for shooting boys in the back and robbing and peddling women and hiding behind God's word. Pray for your own black soul, you louse, and leave me alone. I left the room in a huff, but the man admitted to my family that I was telling the truth about him. He bade them a hurried good night. Early the next morning, I kissed my family goodbye and rode out of their lives. Little did I realize I would not see my loved ones again for many more than a few hours at a time, and that many years would separate us, and many heartaches would follow me. I rode straight west into Hale County. I stopped and worked for 2 months, as it was dry farther west, and work would be hard to find. I worked for a man named Simpson, who had 3 lovely daughters. I fell in love the moment I saw Pearlie Simpson. I loved her harder than thunder could bump a stump. But I kept it to myself. Several times she tried to draw me into conversations, and I would down my head and stare at the floor like a goof. She played childish pranks on me, was mischievous, and all did the silly things girls do when they're flirting. This family had originally lived in Wilbarger County. They knew Dad well. I was never at home long enough to know any of the family friends, though. Pearlie had cast a spell on me, and I was ready to tell her 1 minute, afraid of her the next. I had never had a girlfriend. One morning I had taken the milk to the milk house, which was at the windmill. I had one door, and when I turned to go out, she was guarding the entranceway, blocking my way. She threw back her pretty head and laughed at me and motioned for me to come closer to her. She had beautiful, devilish eyes and long, silky hair. I told her that I was a worthless cowboy and had nothing to call my own. I mentioned to her that I thought she was the one for me, but I would be moving away soon. About that time, Mr. Simpson walked up behind her and stepped aside and let him pass. He had overheard me, and Mr. Simpson said, "Byrd, I like you a lot, but you need to quit being so wild and reckless. Go back to Stephen. He needs you. It's bad over in New Mexico. Go home while you can, boy." I knew he was telling me nicely that he didn't want me hanging around his daughter. I told him I would leave early the next morning, for I was about ready to move on. Too, I thanked him for the advice which he knew I wouldn't heed. I didn't tell him what had just happened back home. I let him think I couldn't turn to farming. The next morning he paid me, and I rode off with Pearlie waving at me from a window. Mr. Simpson's good advice hadn't dampened my hankering for excitement one bit. I headed straight for Portales, New Mexico, which at the time considered to be an adobe house, which served as a post office and a general store. A saloon was kept in the adjoining building to the office. Only a single wall divided the 2 places, and there were 3 adobe dwellings. I laid in a small supply of provisions upon leaving Hale Center, so a small town then 8 miles from Simpson's 1,200-acre stock farm. I had passed the headquarter ranch for the Littlefield Land and Cattle Company on the Yellow House Canyons. I did not stop at the ranch house, for I wasn't hunting work just then. I did stop one night at one of the slaughter line camps. I did not fancy the country much after passing beyond the west line of Hale County. The country was deep, sandy soil covered with sage-grass, now and then a large alkali lake, which grew no vegetation. The water was strong with alkali that could stalk and kill it. I saw many good cattle that were locoed from eating a weed called the loco weed. When stock ate it, they would become crazy and would shake like a man in palsy. When they traveled, they walked as if they were trying to slip on something. They wouldn't eat anything but loco, if they could find it, and can scarcely be driven at all. They will fight a man on horseback, or if they meet a wagon, they will fight the team if they don't get out of the way. Horses also eat the loco weed. It comes up in the fall and grows through the winter months. Cold weather does not hurt it, and cattle and horses eat it at first because it's the only green vegetation there is. It looks inviting to them. It has no bad taste, And the more they eat, the more they crave. A locoed horse is the most provoking thing in the world. They won't lead and will pitch for all they're worth. You can be riding along and come to a cow trail. A darn critter will snort and jump as high as he can, as if he's forced to cross it. You can be riding leisurely along, and suddenly the locoed animal under you will decide to unpack. He wakes up, sticks his head between his feet, arches his back like a furious tomcat, and jumps high and fast. If you fail to stick to your saddle, you'll find yourself afoot, and probably miles and miles from water and food. Thirsty and hungry, you can start back from whence you came. I never had to walk into a camp from being thrown by one of them, but have had the rascals follow me down, jerk loose, and leave me to walk in. I have had them tied to a post while I greased the windmill or tended to a fence, and the horse would set back on the rope and break it. I would be left to walk in the sand, cursing and sweating and wishing I had never seen such thing as a locoed horse. From what we got the old saying, a man acts like he's been eating loco weed. Loco weed, you say? Kind of curious. I mean, they have a definition on what loco is, but it doesn't say anything about what the actual weed was. If you're wondering, that was the end of the chapter. Chapter 5. Dying of Peg-Leg Logan. I was in the DZ ranch just after I'd crossed the line into New Mexico when I rode upon a man with a peg leg. He was hopping along as best he could. The man was evidently in awful pain. I moved in closer and spoke. "Hello, stranger," I said as I broke my horse to a stop. "Seems you happened to hard luck." He looked at me but did not say a word, only stared. I got off my horse and went to him. His tongue was swollen and his eyes had sunk back into his head. I had a canteen of water in my pack on my lead horse. I got a cup and gave him some water. He reached out for the canteen. I told him to wait a little while, then he could have more. I waited, then offered it to him. I helped him on my horse and rode my pack. I saw that his hair under his hat had dried blood and dirt on it. He had gotten a bad fall in some way. We were in the DZ ranch, for most of the cattle had the brand. A man named Jim Curtis bought the DZ cattle and spread from Jim Newman about 1896. Phelps White, Fatty, was foreman of one of the LFD ranches. We traveled slowly, and he would reel in the saddle. Finally, we came in sight of a windmill and some cottonwood trees. I knew there must be a cow camp near, so we headed straight to it. We came to a large alkali lake fenced in so stock could not get to it. We had to go around, which took us 2 miles out of our way. There we saw an adobe house built in a grove of some trees. No one was home. I spread my bed under a tree after the stranger had drunk some more water. I would not let him have it too fast, and I made him comfortable and hobbled out my 2 horses and set about to fix him something to eat. I didn't have anything suitable for a sick man. I didn't even have coffee since I never drank it. I found some crackers and opened a can of tomatoes. He ate a few bites and then set the cup down. I got a pan of cool water from the windmill and washed his face, head, and hands. He had a high fever. I found that he had 3 ribs broken. He also had many bad bruises. I unbuckled his wooden leg. His leg was off at the knee. I pulled off his boots. I hated to leave him, and he was unable to go any further. I hid his wooden leg so he would wander off while I was gone. I put the water near him and saddled up. I headed again for the Portales. I didn't know just how far it was, maybe 25 miles or more. There were no fences, so I headed due west. I could keep my course by watching the stars. Along about 2 in the morning, I heard a dog bark. A welcome sound. I knew I was probably near a house. Soon I could see something in front of me, then several houses popped into view. I called out several times before I was heard, and a woman answered. "What do you want?" she yelled from the closed door. "I need a doctor, a man and his team, and a hack for a sick man I found earlier on the trail." "Who is he?" "Don't know. He couldn't talk. I judge he's been wandering around for days." "My man is away, and so is every other man, except the saloon keeper. Got an old hack and 2 burros, and that's the only team in this town right now. Men folks have gone to Hereford after freight. They'll be gone for at least a week." She opened the door then. "It is 6 miles farther west of the nearest ranch, and their men are probably gone too." "Could I borrow your hack and burros to get a man to a doctor?" I asked. "Yes, but the burros are hobbled out. Not likely you can find them until daylight. Try to get some rest for a little while." I rode a short distance, unsaddled my horse, and hobbled him and lay down. A rooster crowing soon woke me up at the break of day. I felt worn, but I jumped up and went in search of the donkeys. The woman gave me some fever medicine for the man. She kept my horse until I returned. That was the slowest team I'd ever driven since I used to plow oxen when I was a sprig. The ground was rough and there wasn't any road to follow. When I got back to my patient, he was better. He could talk, and he still had the fever. I loaded my bud into the hack for him, got a canteen of water, fed him, gave him the fever powder, and bathed his side in liniment. We traveled slow because of his bruises. He groaned a good deal, but I knew he was really in bad pain. He told me that he was working for the LFD at 4 Lakes. He had started to the DZ wagon when his horse threw him, and he had either pawed him or kicked him. He did not know how long he had wandered around when I found him. He said it was Monday morning when he was thrown. It was Wednesday when I found him. His horse and saddle, pack horse, and 5 loose horses were missing. I told him I would try to get them as soon as I could leave him. He said, "Oh, you debt I can never pay if I live." We rode on in silence for a spell, then he added, "If I don't live, I want you to do me one more favor." When he said no more until we reached Portales, we did not get there until about 10 that night. The only man there was a saloon keeper. He opened his doors to us and did all he could for the poor man. He finally told us that he went by the name of Bill Longfellow. He had been in that country 4 years. He was much worse by the next morning. I tried to get him to let me take him to Roswell to a doctor, but he wouldn't even let me go for one. He said he wouldn't do any good. "My time is here, boy," he whispered to me. "I can't last long, and I don't really care. But will you write 2 letters for me? One is to a man in Kansas, the other to a sheriff of Logan County, Kansas." I got a pencil and paper, and he told me the following. "Dear Sheriff, I'm the one who shot and killed Della McGeorge on the night of May 1st, 1884. I shot her with a .38 caliber pistol when I saw her walking home from church with you Collins. I hid by the side of the road. The shot was meant for you. I'm dying and want to clear my conscience. I hated you because he wandered from me. I hope he will forgive me when he is a free man." I braced his shoulder while he signed the paper. On it he signed the name as John Logan. Then he had me write to Earl McGeorge, the girl's brother, in Eureka, Kansas. He told the man he was sorry for what he had done, as he killed the only woman he had ever loved. He explained to the man how it had happened and asked if he could get Hugh Collins out of the pen where he had been sent up for 99 years. I read the letter back to him. He signed it and lay back while the saloon keeper and I signed our names to both letters. Logan asked me to find that his horses and to notify Phelps White. He didn't say much after that. I think the hot sun and the jolting from the hack had caused blood poisoning to set up on his side. If I had kept him at the DZ camp and could have gotten to a doctor, he might have lived. He died at 12 the following day. The saloon keeper and I buried him, and we started out to find horses and his gear. In time I was to learn of the man called Hugh Collins, as our paths were destined to cross in later years. The horses had drifted to Ranger Lake and had taken up there. The pack horse had still part of Logan's pack, but it was turned underneath his body. The horse had thrown him and lost its bridle, and the cinch had buried itself in the horse's flesh. I found the DZ wagon in my search, and Mr. Curtis promised to take care of the LFD cattle until they could send another man. I went on to Portales and continued my journey northwest, going by the noted Horn Ranch. The Horn Ranch was noted for its bad men who worked there. Old Man Horn, Camp 40 stories tell, was the meanest man in New Mexico. I headed there from Fort Sumner to hang out with Billy the Kid and other men of his class. I wasn't looking for work, and I took my time. I wanted to buy land of my own. I thought that Pearlie, in my hazy daydreams, planned to make her my wife. I didn't settle, and she never became a wife. But as I rode along, I thought of the bad horses I rode at the Simpson place. 6 of them. I bulldogged a 3-year-old steer by jumping from the horseback to the neck of the steer, catching him with both horns in my hands, reaching down and catching his lower lip with my teeth, and reaching back with my spurs and catching him on the forelegs, pulling his head back to one side, and thereby throwing him on his back and holding him until he lay on top of me. But this was something few people had ever heard of, and nobody but a fearless kid would try it. I rode into Fort Sumner one morning. It was a little Mexican town with low adobe buildings, and Mexicans of both sexes and of all ages were loitering in the shade of the buildings, enjoying the hot sun. They looked me over carefully as I rode through. I circled through the town, trying to find a post office. I had written to Pearlie and to my parents. When my horses grazed and rested at noon, I saw a lone white man standing in the door of a long adobe building. I asked him to tell me where the post office was. I started next for the hardware and the grocery store. I needed to increase my supply of ammunition and groceries for a long trip, or stay in the wilderness, for I'd grown tired of the plains and sandhills, and decided to cross the Pecos River and go into the White Mountains. I wanted to get far away from people and towns. When I got back to my horses, I found several men looking them over. They had examined the teeth and the brand, and they asked questions which I answered as politely as I could. It nettled me through. I went on packing my groceries, and then I singled out an honest-looking man in the crowd and told him that I was in part of the country looking for a place to locate a small cattle ranch. I asked him where I could get wood and water and grass all in one spot, and what part might a fellow do well for himself in. He looked me over and said, "If I were looking for a place like that, I would go from here to the old Agua de Caballo, and then from there towards Clayton. If you have any money and grit to back it, you might do okay. Around the Caprock hasn't been claimed by any special outfit yet. It was settled by Mexicans who have more sheep than anything else." He told me it used to be claimed by the Crazy Horse outfit, but that they had all gone out of business. He added that was about as good as I would be able to find anywhere around. He told me that it would be 40 or 50 miles after I left the river before I would come to the timber breaks of the Canadian River on my way to Clayton. I thanked him and mounted my horse and rode north, not telling him where I really intended to go. I aimed to go to Santa Rosa and Las Vegas and had asked about both places. So I jogged along slowly toward the north up the river, most of all evenings, and near night bore to the right into the hills and valleys. I noticed that I had been followed by a horseman from Sumner. I had also slowed down in order to let him catch up with me, but he had borne around to the right and gotten the lead. But never did he leave me more than a mile behind. I had grown suspicious that I was being watched by someone for reasons unknown to me. I thought it might be either a lawman or an outlaw. I had money in my pockets and 2 fine horses. I knew I had brought too much money with me. I selected a good camp in a little valley that evening. The grass was plush and green, and I got some supper, then lay down to rest. I dozed, but woke up immediately when old Dunn snorted. I strained my ears and eyes and had my gun out. I did not know whether someone disturbed my horses walking like they had been driven. I jumped up and ran towards him, my spurs jingling. I could not see my animals in the dark, and I couldn't hear them after I began running. I stopped and lay down and began straining my ears. My horses had vanished into the night. I got up and ran again in the direction I had heard them go. I got tired, so I stopped to rest and take notice of where I was. I did not have much idea of how far I was from camp. I had run until I was panting with sweat and wet with sweat. I lay down and pondered over my present situation. I cursed myself for being such a fool to turn both horses loose. I knew they had been driven off by someone, one who had been following me. I should have traveled a piece further after dark instead of staying where I'd eaten supper. I should have repacked and gone on a mile or two. I could have given the thief the dodge that way. I had to wait until daylight. I found camp, and though it wasn't pleasant being left afoot on the prairie, or and alone, not knowing how far it was from a ranch or a farm, I finally went to sleep. If my horses were crowded, they could travel 8 miles a day for several days, and I hadn't seen many horses around that country that could do that. Next morning, I ate a bite and began looking for tracks. Soon I found the hobbles that had been cut off. I got the course I had taken and decided from the tracks that they were being led. I climbed to the top of a high hill and could see a house off in the north about 6 miles, so I set off for it. When I got to it, I found a woman and her 4 children, ranging in ages from 4 to 17. I found that Mr. Andy Cogger lived there. He had not been in the country for long and only had 4 head of horses. He was using both saddle horses. One of his work horses was a big, clumsy old fellow, and the other a trim, powerfully built steed which had been ridden several times when he was 4 years old, and had thrown a good rider and killed him. He had been turned loose as an outlaw, and Mr. Coger had bought him for a work horse. He told me I was welcome to either of the work horses. I picked the outlaw horse and had to walk and lead him to ride him bareback. I had nothing but my carabine, as I had left camp with it. Mr. Coger went to camp with me to carry the carbine for me, and brought all my camp outfit to keep at his house. I used my skill and strength to keep the old boy from pitching. I left my spurs in my saddle, and if he tried, he might have thrown me without the spurs to hold on with. I needed special strength and a good horse to overtake the thieves. Mr. Coger and I found camp as I'd left it. I rolled my bed and provisions up and put them on the horse, and saddled old Dynamite, and took the trail where I'd found the hobbles. I followed it until dark, hobbled and staked old Dynamite, and lay down on my slicker. I slept that night with coyotes yelping all around me. I could hear them snapping their teeth. The owls hooted all night to make it more forlorn. I was used to noise, but it all sounded particularly loud and lonesome on this occasion. Ouch. 2 chapters down, and ads are coming up. I really didn't think I would do voices in this, but if they're giving me storylines, I read storylines. So, we will go ahead and kick the ads now, and I'll see you in a few minutes. Welcome back, everyone. Hope you all had a good break. So I'm definitely going to say that Byrd Cochrain has had an interesting life so far. And this is only to him being 15 or 16 years old. But now he's hunting down horse thieves, so... And guess what the next title of the chapter is? Chapter 6. Trailing and Catching Thieves. Early the next morning I struck the trail. About 12 noon I rode up to a ranch house, but no one was home. I looked around and saw a saddle and blanket where it had been taken off, the horse some time before. There had been so many cattle coming to the water around the place, I couldn't find horse tracks leaving the ranch. The tracks of my shod horses had been trampled out a mile or so back on the trail of the ranch, but were headed that way when last seen. I was circling the ranch trying to find my horse's tracks when I saw a man on a little hill off a mile or less away. I headed for him. He was George Kelly, the owner of the ranch. He was looking for his horses, too. Every horse he had disappeared during the night. I found the gate to the pasture open, so he thought the stock had rubbed it open. When I told him about my own horses, he knew they had been taken by thieves who took mine. He was fit to be tied about losing them. He told me to go to the Horn Ranch and get Marshal Fatty White and a horse for him. Get a pack horse, too, he added. We will try to follow them to hell and get those horses back. He swore vilely. I did not want to take the time to go to the Horn Ranch, for that meant 24 hours of hard riding, and it would give the thief that much more time to get away. But Mr. Kelly was afoot and a long way from any other ranch. I could expect help from him. He was an old-timer, and he knew the country. He could be of great help to me and save us time. I suggested that he had better take my horse and go to the Horn Ranch himself. I suggested that I cook up a lot of hardtack and have some meat roasted by the time he got back. I told him to take old Dynamite and light out, and I would walk back to the house. I set out on foot, taking my slicker, carbine, and what provisions I had. He had hardly started when Dynamite threw a fit about his new rider. I heard an awful racket and looked over at Kelly and saw him standing on his head in the air, Dynamite with his back lowered, and pitching so high and fast that my saddle stirrups were clanking together over his back every time he hit the ground. I ran to the horse, but before I could get to him, he had thrown his head up and the tail over his back. He started home at a lively speed. I knew the jig was up. I would have to hoof it to the ranch to get a horse. I turned to see if Mr. Kelly was broken in his long, screeny neck, or maybe worse. I could see him lying full length upon the ground. I had left my canteen of water in the saddle for him. I saw it lying a few yards from him. I picked it up and headed for him. A sudden stop of his bald head had rendered him unconscious. It took me some time to get his pulse breathing and his breath back. I took him by the arm and got him to his feet. He could not stand. His head seemed to be too heavy for his body, and he pitched forward upon his face and skinned it some. I saw I had a helpless man in my hands again. I surely did wish I hadn't trusted him to ride that devil of a horse. He had acted fine with me, but I had always watched him and never let him take advantage for one moment, not even in the harness. I had not warned Kelly, and that was why he was thrown so fast. I got some sticks to build a shade over Mr. Kelly, and just as I started back, I happened to notice a shod horse track that I recognized as that of my own dun horse. I had found the trail. I could tell there had been 15 or 20 barefoot horses driven in the bunch with my horses. I went to Kelly and made shade using my slicker for a top, then wet my handkerchief and laid it on his head. When I got to my feet, I saw a Mexican on a burro. He was driving 2 more with water kegs on them. He was headed for the ranch. I started for him in a trot and headed him off. I was hot, out of breath, and short on patience. I'd yelled and waved my hat at him, but he paid me no attention. He just kept going. Using a little sign language, some English and a dash of Spanish, I told him what I wanted. He shook his head and said, "Menos Sabe." I pointed to Kelly and said, "Vamos, hombre mucho malo," which meant for him to go to the man who was sick. He told me he had to go to the windmill and get water for a sheep camp. I told him he would get Kelly to the house or he would go to hell, pronto. I didn't have any trouble telling him to drive his burros to the ranch, and I used no soft words. He grinned at me and made me furious. I drew my gun as quick as lightning and knocked him off his burro. I hit him hard, and if his skull hadn't been so thick and hard, he would have had a dead Mexican on my hands. We had no further trouble. He helped me put Kelly on the burro, and he got up behind him and took him to the ranch. I drove the pack of burro afoot. I found writing paper and told him to fill his kegs while I wrote a letter. I addressed the letter to the foreman of the Horseshoe Ranch and told him what had happened. I asked what they'd get fatty white word. I went out to give the letter to the Mexican. I saw a man coming, and he was leading old Dynamite in a gallop. He was a mean, but surely did look good to me right then. The man was Jim Curtis, one of the owners of the DZ and Horseshoe Ranch. While following their trail in the direction of Kelly's ranch, Jim had seen my horse galloping across the prairie with a saddle on. He went into the house and looked at Kelly. He wanted to know if I wanted him to get white. I told him I thought I could handle the thieves, providing I could get within gunshot of them. He gave me fair warning. "If this is Tom Boulders and his gang, you'll probably get yourself killed. He is a bad character and the best rifle shot in New Mexico." We hired the Mexican to look after Kelly and took to the trail. We camped that night in the desert with nothing for our horses to eat but sagebrush, and not much of that. Next morning we headed due west as the sand had covered up the signs of the horse tracks. We had no particular trail to follow. We pushed on as fast as we could go. We crossed the desert that day and found water and not much grass. The next day, about 9, we found the trail of our horses where they'd been watered. We decided that we were at least 4 men and close to 100 horses. My horse tracks were plain, showing that they were both being ridden behind the herd. This made me furious to think that they were riding them to death. We met 2 men that morning about 11 who had seen the Mexican thieves. They told us they were about 10 miles ahead. We asked the men to help us, but they refused. I felt the 2 men were either on the dodge or up to some mischief themselves. Mr. Curtis mentioned that the big fellow looked like Henry Hawkins, a horse stealer himself. We tied our horses and rested, then pushed on. That evening we spotted 2 men lounging on some grass about 100 yards from us. We tied our horses and crept closer. I wanted to hail the 2 men, but Curtis said no. He wanted to wait until they had gone to sleep, and then plug them. He said our chances would be better that way, so we waited for the moon to rise. I pondered shooting the men while they slept. Just as we got in position to strike, I whispered to Curtis, "Jim, I can't shoot those men in their sleep. That's murder." He looked angry as he said, "You fool, don't wake up Boulder. He wouldn't give you a chance." But I insisted. I told him to let me go to the other end of the canyon and for him to stay put. I said, "When you hear my gun, you do your work here. You can plug both these devils before they wake up, and with one of us at each end of the horses, we can get them all." "Okay, but don't blame me if you end up a carcass," he whispered. I crept away and kept in the shadows of the timber along the side of the canyon until I passed all the horses. I went half a mile or more up on the canyon. I found 3 horses staked, and I knew there were 3 men at the end. I nosed around until I located them in a bunch of timber. I untied all the horses and started back to creep up near the 3 men, when I struck my leg against a bush and it snapped. I saw that I had awakened one of the men. I raised my gun, but it was too slow that time. Boulder was the quickest man I ever saw, or else he had been awakened by the horses that had trotted down the canyon and had been watching me. We exchanged shots, then all was quiet. I lay flat on the ground, and 2 men lay in front of me. I saw one man crawl away with a bullet in his arm. I had fired 8 shots. My carbine was empty. I lay there for several minutes waiting for noise. I spoke, but no answer. I felt some relief. I got up to go back down the canyon. I felt weak for some reason. I realized blood was running down the front of my shirt. It flowed profusely to the center of my chest on my right side. I made my way down to Curtis, and when I saw him, he said, "I suppose they got away? I expected it. You had just to be noble, didn't you?" I left 2 up on the ground and 1 with a bullet in them. What did you do here? Got 1. Why not both? I asked. I did get 1. When the shooting started up there, they both jumped and made a run for the horses, nearly running me over. I tried to shoot, but the damn thing wouldn't shoot. I dropped my rifle and pulled my pistol, and I got 1, and the other got away. Jim was breathless as he told his side of the story. Well, you did worse than I did. He examined my wound and said, You're nearly dead, kid. Thanks. I needed those kind words about now. You sure do bury a fellow before he stops breathing? I liked Jim, and couldn't help but being amused at him. He got me some water and made a bed out of my blanket and slicker. I settled on the ground, and then he asked, Well, you plan to just lay there and die? I think he was serious. No, but I did think I needed a little rest. I don't usually bleed this much when I'm shot. He started to reply, but just clamped his mouth shut and shook his head. He insisted on going to a doctor, but I was too weak to argue. We needed to help with the dead men anyway. I asked him to break a cedar brush and make a shade over the men, but he refused. In fact, he laughed at me. He said if I hadn't been hurt, he would have just thrown them into the bushes and go back home. He saddled up one of the horses the men had stolen from his place and warned me not to move, and he would be back as soon as possible. Left alone with 3 dead men, and maybe more, I could feel death closing in. My short life seemed to pass before me as I lay back and tried to rest. I thought of the good advice various friends had tried to give me. I thought of the fate of Joe Beckham, and Buck, and Dave, and all of the many times Buck had told me how his brother had been framed for political reasons. I lay perfectly still as I could feel blood oozing from my body. I was just a lone cowboy. Right then it looked as if I would die on the open range I'd loved so well. I slept. I woke up. I slept again. I slept fitfully. Then it was morning. I was too weak to raise my head from my saddle. Finally I managed to get a drink from my canteen. I listened to the murmur of the wind and the trees and wondered if God was calling me home. I closed my eyes and pondered the lonely life of a cowboy. All work, not much time for play, cold often, hungry often, many miles away from home always, and a saddle for a pillow, a slicker for a bed, and a horse for a friend. It was evening when Curtis came into sight. I heard the horse's feet on the rocks of the mountainside. Then I saw men come into sight. Curtis was tired and haggard-looking. He was bent forward in the saddle, but he seemed glad I was still alive. The doctor went to work patching me up. After he examined the wound and called the sheriff, and I told him I had been shot with a steel bullet like some man named Grimes, he told me I was better hope than I got Balders. Curtis had already left the men and told how I refused to shoot the Mexicans in the back while they slept, and the kindly doctor was from Carrizozo. When Kelly came to the Mexican had told him all he knew to tell. Kelly took the Mexican's burro and went after White. Then he went to Sumner and got a deputy. They went up the river and found where we had crossed. They followed, thinking they would get there in time to bury us. While White and Kelly joked Curtis about forgetting to cock his Winchester, they told him he had better get a double-action gun before he chased any more thieves. He told them he would just take me along. When the sheriff and doctor went to find the dead Mexicans, they told us we had killed Balders. He had been one of the men I shot, though at the time I didn't know it. Fatty White asked my name. He also wanted to know if I was the same boy who had brought the LFD man to Portales. He told the others about Logan. Finally, they all ate supper and went to sleep. My wound hurt, and I didn't get much rest that night. I was spitting blood. I could tell by the way they nursed me that they didn't expect me to live. After they dug graves the next morning, White said, Well, Cochran, are you next? Where do you want yours? I would like to die first, if you men don't mind, I said, and grinned at them. Well, we don't have much time. The doctor says you can't travel. Thought we would bury you now, just so we wouldn't have to come back over here and get one for just for one cowboy. Fatty White joked. I tried to smile, but the effort was too much. They decided I would go to Widow Clark's ranch since I couldn't travel far, and they needed to get back. I asked Mr. Keller to take old Dynamite home and pay Mr. Koger for the use of him. I told him I would pay him later. They rounded up the horses, and I was surely glad to see my two in the bunch. The deputy rode off by himself, leaving the doctor and the sheriff to take me to Mrs. Clark's home that evening. Mrs. Clark received us courteously. She was a middle-aged woman who had lived in the West all her life, and had come to that country as a young bride from San Antonio, Texas, to settle in White Mountains. She had two boys, aged 10 and 12. And her husband had been dead about 11 months. She and the boys had had the ranch. Slurring all over the place. Her husband had been dead about 11 months. She and the boys had held down the ranch and were lonely for company. During my stay there, the doctor visited the ranch several times. My right lung was healing slowly. Can't believe I'm stumbling this much in it. Chapter 7. Working on the Stewart Ranch. I wasn't able to work hard and I couldn't ride bad horses, so I went to work on the Horseshoe Ranch doing odd jobs for a spell. The ranch was located near Tucumcari, New Mexico. It was there I witnessed one of the most brutal killings I'd ever seen. A good many settlers were coming to the country east of the spread. Strife was going on between cattle and farmer, and outlaws were running rampant. I had to stay neutral due to my condition. There were three men named Spikes who moved from Lubbock County, Texas, and an old man named Sam Golson, whom I remember well. Golson had 2 or 3 son-in-laws named Nations and Lee. All were said to be man-killers. Golson was a dangerous man if crossed. There were some hard characters who hung around them. Hey, Corey. The Spike boys, Dick, John, and Fred, were accused of harboring Henry Hawkins and his men. They were stealing from everyone, and Hawkins had a reward on his head, dead or alive. Golson was running green cattle from Logan County and had gotten Fatty White and the Horn Ranch to come over and take his headquarters for a while at his place. They made things mighty hot for Hawkins, and suddenly Hawkins disappeared. They claimed to have followed him to the line of Old Mexico and won themselves a good reputation. 7 of them waylaid Spikes and gang. They shot and killed John and Richard Spikes on the spot. They got Fred, but his horse carried him away, and a Mexican hauled him to Hereford, where he stayed in a sanitarium for several months. White, Sam, and his boys, and some others were hid in a deep ravine near a fence that the Spike boys were working on, and shot them down from the banks of the ravine. They were freed of all charges. One of the men who was in the Spike's ambush was whipping a boy who was working with him one morning. He was on his horse and was hitting him with a double rope. The boy, barefooted in his shirt sleeves, walking. George Nations was riding beside him. Charlie Simpson, a man I had just met, happened along to the Nations beating the boy. Instead of killing Nations, Simpson pulled his gun and told him not to hit the boy again. Nations skulked away like a coyote, but afterwards he caught Simpson off guard and killed him. I was sitting on the ground near Simpson when all this happened. We were having our dinner. Simpson did not notice Nations and his bunch as they rode up. Nations drew his pistol and, without warning, shot Simpson 6 times. The first shot that hit him knocked him over and paralyzed his right arm, as it struck the shoulder. It was the worst gunfight I ever saw take place for me to have to sit and do nothing. It happened so fast, and one had a chance to do anything. I carried Charlie Simpson back to Tucumcari with me. Not long after that, I got a letter from one of the Pearlie sisters telling me that Pearlie was dead. She had gone with her father to Vernon, Texas, to have an operation on her jaw, and there she had died for some reason. Pearlie had asked her to write me. I was still not well, but with Pearlie gone, I had an uncontrollable urge to move on. The doctor who tended my wounds had told me to go to Arizona, and that the climate would be good for my lungs. I sent my dad some money, but I didn't mention any of the things that happened to me or what I had seen, and then I headed to Douglas, Arizona. I did not crowd my horses, as I was not too strong and in no hurry. I felt rather odd as I rode along the trails. I was a young man, but my life had already been crowded with adventure. On the trail, I met a man who stopped me to pass the time of day. He wanted to find out how far it was back to the trail I had traveled to get water and grass for his horse. He camped that night with me, and we talked for a long time. He told me that he had been a small cattleman in that country and had been stolen out by big outfits. He had lost his wife, so he sold his place and was headed back to Whitesboro, Grayson County, Texas, to spend the remainder of his time. It was he who told me about Mr. Stewart, who needed someone to help his ranch. He told me how to get to the Stewart ranch and advised me not to carry too much money on me. He warned me not to go through any towns or ask the way to the ranch. 3 days later, after I left the man, I rode into Stewart Ranch, carrying a note from the man. I was met by a boy about 12. He asked me if I knew his dad. I told him I didn't, but that I'd rather have this letter from a neighbor of theirs. He looked at the note and grinned. He said they had always called him Uncle Bill, and he invited me into the house, but I told him I would wait outside until his dad got home. There were 5 children. The mother had died about 6 months prior to my coming. When Mr. Stewart came home, he took me into the house and began asking questions about my horses. I explained to him I needed work but couldn't do any heavy work just yet. He told me that the Hash Knife outfit wanted his land for his house. I had known the Hash Knife outfits all my lives. Their headquarters ranch was in the Baylor County, Texas, when I was a kid, where the town of Seymour now stands. I had known some of the men who worked for them. Next morning he looked over my horses and asked if either of them had ever been on a racetrack. I told him that both of them had, but the other horse was beat at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and the other had been run only a few times and hadn't been beat yet. He wanted me to stay at the ranch a month or so to put the horses in shape to run. He seemed very eager to get started on training my horses. Sam Hilliard had cleaned out a couple of years back, and he wanted to get even. He told me that if I had any money to use, he could get me 5 to 1, maybe more if the horse was fast enough to beat Hilliard's black horse. We set to work putting the Blue Roan in shape. When he tried him out, Mr. Stewart was the happiest man I've ever seen. No one had seen me around, so we started planning a match without arousing suspicion. I wanted to help Mr. Stewart get back some of what he had lost if I could. One evening I arrived in Bisbee from the east and tied my horse in a hitch rack and went into the barber shop. When I came out, there was a crowd of men looking over my horse. Some of them even tried to buy it. They asked me if the Blue had ever been on a racetrack. One man wanted to take my horse and try it. I said no. Sam Hilliard introduced himself and wanted to know how long it would take me to train a horse for a race. I told him 3 weeks and that I would have to see the other horse first. Sam had his jockey bring his horse to him. I asked how much the odds would give, and he told me none. He wanted to know how much forfeit I would put up. We went to the bank and got a forfeit contract drawn up. If either of us should fail to appear or fail to run, the other would get the $500 we put up. When I got back to the ranch, Mr. Stewart was very happy about the deal. He said, "I have 2 good locks, Byrd, to put on the stable doors and make sure they're locked day and night. Sleep with that horse, or you will lose him around here." The day before the race, Mr. Stewart went to town. He told me when he returned that Mr. Hilliard seemed concerned about my disappearance. He had even had some men out looking for me. He decided I wouldn't show. The race was at 11. At 10, I was loping the Blue on the track. The crowd had already gathered. Mr. Stewart was calling every bet he could. He passed by me and whispered, "Keep a stiff upper lip. Things are fine." He told me to leave town as soon as the race was over, and I would get my share of the money. Howard and I went back to the bank and got our forfeit money, and he bet me 3 to 1 that his horse would beat mine. We were running a half mile, and my spirits were running a little higher than when I put up the money. I did not say much, though, and I had no intention of riding my horse in the race. I had a scheme. Howard asked me where I'd been. I told him the hill was for my health, and I told him I had found it cheaper to live that way. He said, "I tried to find you. You must be in a hole to crawl in." When we got back to the racetrack, I pulled off my saddle and laid on the ground. I put on my surgical and was standing by my horse when a young man rode up and said, "Hey, I have $25 that says your crowbait can't beat that black." He told me his name was Joe Allen. We talked for a bit, and I found he was from Callahan County, Texas. His mother was a widow, and he had one sister younger. You put your money where your mouth is, boy, and you got a bet. He put it up, and so did I. Several others then called small bets. 11 o'clock came, and I held the little roan back by a neck's length in the black, so there would be no argument that I had got the start on him, and hooked my bridle over the hook of the cringle and slid off and said, "Go get him, boy." The little fellow was in the lead by 3 jumps and kept the lead until they went under the wire at the half-mile post and circled, then came back to me and got his sugar. I went to my saddle and gave the horse the sugar. I got money and told him we could eat for a long time now. I headed next to the livery stable, but passed it by and rode towards the mountains for a while, circled the town and headed for my camp of the night before there were Mr. Stewart's place. And I put my horse in his stable and ate the breakfast the girls had prepared for me, and told the kids all about what had happened at the race. It was 6 the next morning when Mr. Stewart got home with the news he had won enough money to save his ranch. He could now buy more cattle and clothes the children badly needed. That night, Mr. Stewart asked me to go in with him as a partner. I told him I didn't want to be tied to one place. I sang a few old cowboy songs to the children before their bedtime. As I sang parts of California Joe, I began to feel an itch in my heels. The sun was slowly sinking when Mag, my wife, and I came riding through the valley, the teardrops in her eyes. 1 year ago, Joe, I see the mossy grave. We laid him beneath the daisies, my uncle true and brave. And comrades, every springtime is sure to find me there, as something in that valley is always fresh and fair. Our lives newly kindled while sitting by the stream, where 2 hearts were united in love's sweet happy dream. That's finally verse 11. I gained back the weight I lost, and my lung was healed. I sent more money to the folks, and I heard that in town some of the people were mad because I had run my horse without a rider. Some of the men had bet all they had. Hilliard was the heaviest loser. He was a bachelor and had plenty. Okay. I think I might be able to get one more chapter. I hope no one clipped me singing again. Slow your retreat, but as sure as the dawning, leaving but memories and strive as you may, looms the bliss of eternity yawning, and into its maw and forever away. Chapter 8. Working on the Quien Sabe. In the year 1901, I wandered back to Portales, New Mexico, looking for land of my own. I went there to Fort Sumner, and from there to Tucumcari, where I brought out the improvements rights of a man named Teague. He had had a fair little house, a dugout, and something near 20 acres of good land and farm, which I had planted corn and cane. I worked in the cedar breaks, cutting posts, hauling them into Portales for sale. Many of the settlers had rather buy them already cut. I stayed in the new home until 1901. Then I went back to visit the folks. Dad needed help, so I sold my place to a friend at Portales, and winter was a severe one. Dad and I fed a bunch of beef cattle, which were sold later at a fairly decent price. The spring of 1903 came. With this a slow, quiet turn of the season. I sat down in the milk buckets one day. With a heart tinged with frustration and unrest, I put all my belongings in a wagon and headed for Gaines County, Texas, as yet unsettled. I went to the ranch of Henry Half in the northwest corner of the county. Mr. Half had several thousand acres of land in Midland, Glasshock, and Upton. He didn't have work for me just then, so I went to New Mexico and hired out to Ben Baker, better known as a Sea Hop on account of his makeup. He was a bachelor of 50, 6 feet 9, and weighed 165 pounds. His legs made up most of his form, and they were about 4 feet long, more or less. But old Hop was a cowboy. He was one of the best ropers that the world had ever known. He was a man of few words and very droll. He had sandy complexion, a Roman nose, hatched face, but for some reason was very well liked by the ladies. I was foreman of the Crazy J outfit, and he seemed to want to give me plenty of horses to ride. They had a surplus of young half-broken ones ranging from 5 to 7 years old. Only a few had ever been ridden with bridle. Most of them had only been haltered and broken 1 or 2 years prior to being turned out on the range. One of the horses I rode was an old iron-gray horse that would have been the pride of any cowboy had he been gentle. But as he was shunned by all who knew him. Old Hop had never had a puncher to ride him. He had thrown one man, Blondie Tom Arnold, in the sandy hills and had worn the saddle until he sank up so badly that the sand he was lost. Only few pieces were ever found. Mr. Arnold, who weighed about 185 pounds, was a real bronc buster, too. When Seahop turned out to the long, slick black, he told all the boys to take down their lassos and be ready to catch the Nestor's horse. But I sat loose in the saddle and fanned the beautiful black with my top hat. Before I quit, I had the horse under control. Instead of Hop being pleased, he seemed to be irritated at me. So when 8 different cow wagons camped in the circle several days later, Bob Puckett roped out a horse called Blue Jay and brought him out to Gene Higgins, a New Mexico wild horse tamer. He held him down while I buckled the saddle. When it was ready, he told Bob to slacken the rope, and I sprang into the saddle and told Higgins to let her go. He turned the brute loose. First I went up into the air, and then a big silver watch flew out above me to catch the... First I went up into the air. Then a big silver watch flew up above me, which was picked up by some of the men. Blue Bronco did his best at the fence rows for a few minutes, then changed his tactics by swinging his sides for a while of a lightning speed. Then he would crawfish. I conquered the horse. When I rode him back to the wagons, I got many compliments and handshakes. Some ladies came up to praise me. I tipped my hat and moved on by them. After branding was over that summer, I visited home again in Baylor County. In Baylor County, Texas, I broke a 5-year-old stallion. This took place on the ranch of Mr. Elmer Scholes. It took 2 good men and myself to saddle the horse. He tried to paw me to death before I could ride him. He kicked and bit at me with all his strength. When I mounted him, he quit the earth and bucked with all his might. It took me only 4 days to master him for Mr. Scholes. He paid me, and I moved on. Dad soon met me at Stanton, Texas, and we purchased some land from the state of Texas. I purchased 4 sections in one of Henry Half's pastures. I paid $1.50 per acre of it. I started out improving immediately. When I ran short of money, I went back to Mr. Half and asked for work. His foreman, Ace Robinson, had just quit to marry a girl in Fisher County, and Bob Thomas had taken his place. Bob was a seasoned cowboy, liked by all. He liked his red whiskey too well, though. In 1905, he nearly lost his life from it. He got stewed and lay out in the snow overnight and froze his face and ears. I found Barnes Tillis at the headquarters ranch. He was a tall, dark man, black hair and eyes, and very nice looking. He was the foreman. He was a bit rough on me at first, and I told him my business, and he tried to hurrah me about making a living on 4 sections. I informed him I wasn't afraid of starving. I started for my horse, and he called me back. He told me not to get so impatient. Good men were needed at the Quien Sabe. We went into the house where he wrote a letter for me. Before I left, I had leased Mr. Barnes my 4 sections of grazing purposes, also my dad's land. Dad had returned to Wilbarger and did not intend to return until spring, when he would build a house. The law required him to live on 1 section of the land for at least 6 months out of the year, for 3 years. Mr. Thomas seemed pleased to have me working for him. He made things pleasant as possible, and winter passed and spring came. The horses and cattle had come through the cold and good fresh. But once, while cutting cattle to be shipped from the ranch to Kansas pastures to fatten up for all the markets, I was almost killed by one of my favorite cutting horses. We were driving some 6,000 head to Portales, where we would ship them on. My horse fell on me and smashed me flatter than a pancake. I stayed unconscious for about a week. The rest of the spring of 1905 passed without mishap. In early fall, I overmatched myself in a first fight and got an eye closed and my nose broken. My opponent weighed about 250 pounds. Next to me, he looked like a giant. I decided I had business somewhere else and headed in another direction to attend to it, but my enemy was giving me a fast chase. This was the only time I backed down from a fight. I headed for the house and out of sight. Soon after that, Bob was sent to Mineral Wells for treatment of rheumatism, and he never returned. Later, he became a foreman of another ranch in Baylor County. I was made foreman of the JM Ranch. It was while working on the house spread that I was waylaid by two brothers and nearly killed. I was busy moving fence. A man by the name of August Holbrook was helping me. Bert Ansel and his brother Lee wanted the fence for their own use and tried to take it from us. Bert hit me in the head with an axe. Then, as he started at me again, Lee yelled at him for him to leave me alone, as I was already dead. August carried me to town with blood spurting everywhere. I wear a steel plate to this day resulting from that brutal attack. I'll relate one more story about Bob Thomas before I leave him for good. While he was still at the ranch, we were told to get 4,000 head of cattle that were watching all together in one pasture, so they would be thrown into two herds by trail outfits who were coming to take them to Portales. This was during the month of May. The weather was rainy and cold for that time of year. The cow chips were so wet that they could not burn. There was not a stick of wood to be found in the JM or Portales. There was a mad cook and a hungry bunch of cowboys that arrived in town several days later, who had not had a good night's sleep in days and only half-cooked chow. The boys tried to keep warm by pouring down their corn juice. The town was quite changed. I hardly recognized the little town where had helped bury Pegleg Logan. I was too tired and hungry myself to care much about that. The railroad had been built through the country from Amarillo to Portales and on to Roswell, from Roswell down to the Pecos River and to Pecos City, where it made connections to the Texas Central Railroad. The building of the railroad had brought the people in from all over the country. As best I remember, there were maybe 9 bars and gambling houses that never closed their doors. There were other cow outfits shipping as many cowboys spent their money at these bars. Poor old Bob was one of them. He spent his last red cent in that town. When we got ready to start for the ranch, he had nothing left to show for winter work. He scarcely had clothes to keep him warm. He was a big, sympathetic fellow, Bob was, and he never did anyone any harm except himself. He hated red-eye of any brand, so that when he found it, he just wanted to get it out of the way of others. Leastwise, that's what he would say. Rufus Bishop was a good friend of his. He wanted to help Bob all he could, but to keep Bob from getting too drunk, Rufus called in everyone else to help get rid of the stuff for Bob. It was indeed a hard-looking bunch of men that started back to Midland. We took a good supply of whiskey with us. When one of the men got too drunk to ride, we unsaddled his horse and staked it near him, and left him to come on when he'd sobered up. Henry and Clark, Bob, and Lee Reynolds were 3 days catching up on us. The terrible part was Clark was killed by one of the best horses on the ranch trying to catch up. Some of the boys lost their jobs when we got back to the Half Ranch. When Mr. Half sold me the JM Ranch, I was forced to go to Midland if I continued to work for him. I really liked my job and my boss. When he sent the wagon and the men to the JM to get the cattle moved from there to the Pecos River Ranch, I took my saddle horses and went to the headquarters in Midland. Mr. Half gave me a job on his ranch in Glasscock County. Mrs. Rosa Half was a native of New York City, but she seemed to love the country around her. She had 3 brothers, Dan, Bill, and Lawrence, who were jolly young fellows and were willing to take all the jokes and knocks and the good humor up to a point. They asked many questions about the ranch life when they visited her. They had been on our ranch one day when I arrived. After they rested a few days, Mr. Half asked me to get one of the boys who was working there to take the wagon and team to go to Lawrence, to Midland, after their trunks. I asked Claudel to go. Mr. Half told Lawrence to go to the barn so he could get ready for where Caudle was. Lawrence went to the barn, and Caudle decided to have some fun with him. He handed him a bridle and showed him old Jonah, and told him to walk upon the right side of him very carefully. Not that the mule was blind in his right eye, and he could not see him. He told Lawrence to just grab the beast around the neck with both arms and hold him, or he would get loose. Then he would be hard to catch again. Lawrence obeyed. Jonah paid and whirled around like a top, then he slung poor Lawrence loose. After a while, the mule kicked off most of the kid's clothes and ran away, leaving the boy bare and bruised and bleeding. It was in that condition he limped back to the house. Mr. Half had heard the commotion as the cowboys had gathered around and were laughing their heads off at Lawrence and his mule. When Mr. Half saw Lawrence, he was so furious at all of us, and he asked him how he had gotten so torn up. I guess I've done something mighty funny by the way the cowboys were laughing at me. That mule nearly killed me, and Okay, I'll drink. I guess I've done something mighty funny from the way those cowboys are laughing at me. That mule nearly killed me, and I don't see a thing funny about that. Lawrence went into the house in a huff. Mr. Half came to the barn and asked me what happened. I had to tell him. I was in the barn and suddenly I saw Lawrence in the air, feet and all hanging with both arms around old Jonah's neck, and old Jonah acting like a bronc mule that had been turned loose with a harness on. I went to Caudle, who by that time was trying to harness Eve, Jonah's mate. He told Mr. Half what had happened and laughed again. He got fired. Mr. Half was an easy man to work for. He had reasons for everything he did. He was kind to all his men, but the pranks were not always funny to him. I sent Zach Monroe then with instructions to take good care of the boy. I handled Caudle's check and told him he could take him as far as Midland. He hated to lose the job, but said it was worth it to see such a show from the tenderfoot. Things went along smoothly until the two boys decided to learn to ride a horse. They wanted to be cowboys, they thought. Mr. Half asked me if I had a gentle horse or two that they could mount for the boys to use a little while. I told him I had one I would recommend as safe. He said, "Give it to the youngest, and the next to Lawrence." I remember only Lawrence and Dan being at the ranch. I really dreaded this ordeal, but the boys were so eager to try out their mounts. Dan was 19 and was a bright pup and favorite of the men. Lawrence was large and gawky and slow to catch on, and a bit independent. He wore glasses, so we called him Frog Eyes. I caught and saddled up Old Hart for the kid, and I saddled Old Dutch for Frog Eyes. The boys came on the scene dressed in their cowboy uniforms, broad-rim hats, boots, spurs, and the works. They led their horses out of the corral, and I held the youngest boy's horse for him while he mounted. Eager Beaver Frog Eyes couldn't wait. He just had to do it himself. As soon as Old Dutch felt the weight in the saddle, he began to move out. He was a spirited beast and accustomed to being handled by experienced cowboys. Frog Eyes left his bridle reins hanging loose, so when he landed behind the saddle and struck Old Dutch in the flanks with his sharp spurs, the old horse started in a gallop. I yelled out to him to get in the saddle, and pull up the bridle reins. The warnings came too late, or he just didn't hear me. Old Dutch lost no time then unpacking his inexperienced rider. I put his nose to the ground and sent his tail and heels into the air as high as he could. The kid landed on hard, solid ground in front of the shop door. He landed all sprayed out on the front side from turning a few somersaults in the air like a circus clown. I ran to him and tried to help him get up. He weighed about 50 pounds more than I did, and nearly pulled me down in the effort. In the background, the cowboys were fairly whooping it up. Mrs. Half came running from the house. She helped the boy get dusted off and grabbed his stomach and gasped, "Oh, my stomach! Oh, my stomach!" He was a trooper. Later he wanted to ride another horse. I caught Glasseye for him. I told him the horse would do fine if he treats him right. He was a little more patient this time. He waited for me to hold the horse while he mounted. The horse stood perfectly still until Lawrence gabbed him with his spurs and pulled as hard as he could on the reins. The horse started and reared up and fell broadside on the ground. He caught Frog Eyes beneath him and mashed his leg and foot pretty bad. He was out of commission for several days. By the time he was up and around, he had lost all desire to live the life of a cowboy. Dan was different. He liked to ride and watch the cattle graze. He told us all about his girl in New York and promised to bring her to visit with us. He did bring her to the ranch, but after I was gone. About this time I met Belle Deloche, and we passed many happy hours together. She dearly loved to dance, though, and never missed a cowboy entertainment given a Saturday night. I liked to sing, but seldom tried to dance. I played the fiddle for some dances. We had a short engagement, though. On the 4th of July, I carried her to the dance in Knowles, New Mexico, that budding little town I mentioned in connection with meeting Hill Loftus, Ellis Tom Ross, Ellis Charles Gannon. At 2 in the morning, I asked Belle if she hadn't danced enough for us to leave. She informed me that she would dance as long as she pleased, and it pleased her to stay. I had promised her parents I would see her home safely, and no later than 2. I couldn't get her to budge. I informed her brothers then of my plans, and told him I was going to go home to bed, and asked him to see that she got home. That was all of that romance. I left early the next morning and headed for the ranch headquarters, leaving her behind me forever. In about 10 days, I got a letter of apology. Many years after that, I saw an uncle of hers who told me she was still single. In November of 1907, I had to go to a pasture that was called the Three-Well Pasture. I had to be gone several days, and when I returned, I found a young lady visiting Mrs. Will Medland and her husband. The Medlands had moved to the ranch after Miss Half and his family had left for the winter. It was their custom to spend the winter months elsewhere, probably in Atlanta City, Georgia, and the White Mountains where he first met Miss Half. Mrs. Medland did the cooking, and Will did the milking and other jobs. Their own little ranch was close by the house spread. After Mrs. Half departed, there were no men on the ranch except for Mrs. Hound. She was visited by women from neighboring ranches or friends from Midland or Garden City. But, as I remember, this young lady was the prettiest of them all. Did I actually miss pages here? Young lady was pretty, okay. Myrtle Ashley was her name. Mrs. Medland finally introduced me to her one day at dinner, but Zach Monroe and Ben Steen claimed her all the time. I had very little time to talk to her. I chided myself anyway for thinking she might go for the likes of me. I had been a loner all my life, and I thought I'd best keep it that way. However, the day before she was to leave, and I realized I might never see her again, I did panic a bit. Mrs. Medland asked me to hitch my team to the buggy and to get Miss Molly Hilder to bring her to the ranch that evening. She wanted Molly to spend the night there and help Myrtle entertain the hungry cowboys. We were all starved from the sight of some pretty girls. I had no objections to Miss Hilder coming, but wanted some of the other boys to go get her. We stayed up late that night. I did some singing for them and got a few chances to talk to Myrtle. After I went to bed that night, I reflected upon the prospects of the future and regretted much of my past. I wondered then what hopes I had, or did I dare imagine Myrtle as my wife on a little ranch, maybe children. I thought of some of the experiences I had after the Stewart Ranch before I finally made it back home. I'd gone to work for the Diamond A Ranch in Arizona. While hunting the Yaqui Gold, I nearly lost my life. I thought, too, of the fight I'd had in Bisbee. I didn't know it at the time, but it was a put-up job. A gambler needled me in the bar for drinking soda instead of whiskey. I took all I could, and I jumped him. He outweighed me 40 pounds or more. My toe caught the gambler in the crotch, and my right fist landed on his chin. And my left was a burr at his ear. I kicked in some ribs, broke his jaw, and did damage to some front teeth. Some of the men from the ranch had tried to pull me off, but I just kept on kicking and slinging. The foreman said I was the finest piece of humanity he had ever seen. I told him that I was the maddest I had ever been. While I was fighting, someone took my 2 fine horses. I left the Diamond A early the next morning to go after the thieves. 3 days later, I came back to the ranch, riding one of my horses, leading the other one, and the borrowed one. I showed the men 4 pair of human ears I had taken from the horse thieves. One man came by the ranch one night and talked them into going down to Old Mexico to hunt gold. I had been across the border and didn't want to go again, but the men were dead set on going. I thought of the canyon we got trapped in. 10 men had quit the ranch to take the trip, and 2 of us had only returned. The Indians had also took my two fine horses, so that night I lay and I thought of the foolish things I'd done. I felt unworthy of her love. Before Myrtle left the next morning, she did promise to write to me. Zack Monroe and Miss Molly accompanied her home. When she left, I felt the ground moving underfoot. I wanted to move on. Most of the time I thought of her instead of my job. 2. A saddle tramp when the Wanderlust struck again. Mr. Half sold a string of mother cows to Bittler in Shotwell, Eureka, Kansas, and they were to be delivered by the 1st of May in 1908. I was to be in charge. If I had not made that trip, I might have found the courage to ask Myrtle to be my wife. It only served to kindle the fire that was burning in my bosom to seek new range. She had written to me asking her to visit her in Wingate, Texas. I wanted to see her, and I wrote that I would. The son of Mr. Shotwell accompanied me on the trip. He had been raised in the city and showed me a new way of life. He was well acquainted with the vices of the city. Our stopover at Fort Worth in Wichita, Kansas, gave him a chance to give me my formal initiation to the ways of the world and women. I was gone 8 days on the trip, which shouldn't have taken more than 5. I learned more about the meanness that sin perpetrates than I had learned in all my 20-plus years. When I did return to Midland, I found things changed. Mr. Half had made these changes, and some I didn't like. Bill Irvin had been on a big drunk and had taken a shot at Mr. Half, plowing a furrow through his black hair with a .45 bullet. I had been discharged, of course. Another man had been hired to take his place, and Steen had gone to Dakota. It was about 4 in the morning when I got to Midland. I slept about 2 hours, and then I went to see Mr. Half. I called the ranch first, and was told he was in a hotel in town. He was as cross as an old bear, and told me to hurry up and get to the ranch. I left the room with a discontented heart. When I entered the lobby, a large, heavy-set man came up to me and asked if I worked for Mr. Half. I told him I had been, but was probably not for long. He told me that he was Mr. Pence, a manager for Morris and Company, and he was looking for men to carry cattle to the Dakotas. The Morris Company had bought out to the old L7 Cattle Company and was restocking with cattle and men. It was now the C7. He offered me a handsome monthly salary and expenses paid for the trip. That sounded good to me. Mr. Pence said that he would have a cattle loaded that day for me to be in Odessa ready to take charge of the train load. I hurried back up the stairs to Mr. Half's room and told him the sudden change of plans. His wife told me he was asleep and that she wouldn't wake him. I told her what I wanted and left. When Mr. Half woke, he sent for me to come to see him. He asked me to stay on, but I was determined. He asked me to go out to the ranch and get some business straightened out before leaving the country. I started out to the ranch, which was about 16 miles from Midland. 6 miles from the ranch, I came upon an old mare grazing alongside the road. I told the boy who had come with me to stop when I got the mare. We hadn't gone much further when I found a cowhand we called Fred, sound asleep beside the road and dead drunk. He had been to town and had gotten so stewed that he had fallen off his horse. It was about half a mile from the schoolhouse. I looked around and seeing no one in sight, I gave in to the devil-may-care urge and killed the old mare and took out her entrails, and placed old Fred in their place, leaving only the head sticking out beneath the tail. I wound a rope around him so he wouldn't get out, and there I left old Fred for the coyotes to nibble on. At 12 noon the next day, he came to the ranch, and a more dilapidated sight I've yet to see. He looked like the lowest remnant of humanity as he stood before us all covered in dried blood. His hair was matted and his eyes were swollen. He said when he woke up he found himself cramped inside an old mare he had been riding. Only his head had been left sticking out, and the coyotes were eating the mare when he came to his senses. About daylight he was bothered by wild hogs. A bunch of them came around and began to eat. He was scared to death of the coyotes, but he knew the hogs would eat him alive. They paid no heed to his frantic yells. He managed to keep them away by his constant shouting of "Suey, pig, suey!" And when the children came by him on their way to school, he could not see them, and they could not see him. But they heard him sueying calls, and they ran home and told their parents what they had seen of the old dead mare and the hogs eating on her, and that she was saying for them to suey. They were afraid to pass the mare, and their dad had to go with them to inspect. He was the one who found old Fred in this pitiful state. He was starved for water and almost dead from being cramped inside the old mare. Fred was a native of old Ireland, and he had not forgotten the Irish language. He was telling us about how he felt while he lay there confined in the old mare's belly. He said that he promised of his Jesus that if he would deliver him from that old mare's belly like he did Jonah from the whale, he would swear off of drinking. Years later, Fred's wife told me that he still wasn't drinking. He never suspected me as a prankster. He promised to shake the mischievous lad to death if he ever caught him. He could have beat me good. We laughed hard about old Fred, but the boys told me that never even got with me before I left the ranch, and it was a good one. Will Medland and Zach Monroe went for town and got onto a dummy of a show widow and dressed the thing up to look like Molly Hilger. They charged the phone wire so that it would enter the house just in front and over the room door, which opened onto the porch. There was no one at the ranch when I arrived late that Tuesday evening, but when I found the note from Mrs. Medland and the night supper was waiting for me, she told me in the note that the boys had gone to Garden City and would not be home until late. After my meal, I cleared away the dishes, and then I went to my room to read a paper. Everything was still as death, and not a breeze stirred to turn the noisy windmill that stood close to the yard. The big sycamores were lifeless and at ease. I had some time to think about the people I'd be leaving behind by going off to Dakota. I was suddenly aware I was being watched from the outside. Suddenly, I heard my name. "Byrd! Byrd!" I recognized Molly's voice calling me. I jumped to my feet and in 2 leaps was on the front porch. I saw her standing on the ledge. I spoke to her, but no answer came. I called her name and told her that everyone had gone to town. No answer. She stood motionless, looking at me. I strained my eyes in the darkness for a better look. I was sure it was Molly. It was her dress and bonnet. I'd seen it many times. I could not imagine, though, how she had gotten to the ranch at that time of night. I stepped from the porch and started to take her arm. I called her name. I asked her why she had called out to me. She backed off the porch and went over the fence and disappeared into the night. I went back into my room, quite bewildered. Her actions had given me an eerie feeling, so I shut the door behind me. It was a nice night, and before I had left the door open, I still had the paper in my hand, so I sat down and tried again to read. I could not keep my eyes on the black words. I felt rather stupid, yet I knew Molly had stood before me. I had heard her call my name. Then it happened again. "Byrd! Byrd!" It was the same voice. Molly was sobbing this time. My hair began to stand on end, so I sat for a moment and listened. It came a little louder and deeper and more desperate. I got up and jerked the door and stepped on the porch, ready for battle. "Now you look here, Molly Hilger," I shouted. "What in the Sam Hill is wrong with you?" I demanded, moving closer to her. "I am damn tired of this foolishness. If nothing is wrong, by darn I'll make you talk. Why don't you answer me?" She didn't answer. I was mad. I said, "I will make you talk." With a mighty bound, I sprang at the dummy and caught it in both my arms, just as it started to move away from me. A peal of laughter from a dozen people burst out upon the still night. Molly came crawling out from under the porch where she had been all the time, and I felt like crawling into a hole. I was so ashamed of my cursing in front of the ladies, and everybody was laughing so hard at me, my apologies fell on deaf ears. I've never seen a group of cowboys laugh so hard, and at my expense. I had it coming. The cowboy's life was far from glamorous. It wasn't dull either, not in my life especially. Sam Preston and his wife gave a big dancing following Tuesday night, and that was to be my last night in Texas for some time. I wanted to go so I could tell all the old cowboys goodbye. I had just one more stunt to pull. I got a big old jack-o'-lantern that I had for some time, trimmed it up in good shape, and went to where Lewis Brown and his wife lived. They had not been married long. Mrs. Brown and I took an immediate dislike for each other. She had a sharp tongue and was constantly cutting at the men. They had a big goat that belonged to Rose Howiff, and they tried to keep it out of the yard. I took my lantern and tied it up on the billy goat's horns and led him inside the yard and waited for some time. I held my breath as Mrs. Brown came out the back door. I kept old Billy as still as a mouse. with the face of Jack turned on her, and from behind the rose bushes until I caught everything just as I wanted. I let go of Billy and gave him a hard kick in the ribs, and he bounded forth right in front of her, made for the gate fast. She screamed and yelled, and I went to the lot and took the lantern off Billy's head and then rode on to the dance. I met Mr. Pence in Odessa, and he gave me the address of Charlie Hardy, Morristown, South Dakota, superintendent of the vast C7 spread. I had charge of 2,300 head of 2-year-old steers headed for a strange place. Little did I dream of what the future held for this old-time cowboy. As I sat in the caboose of that stock train, I thought the country I was leaving behind me. The train moved on through the night. Heavy clouds hovered near and lightning flashed. I felt small and lonely. I looked through the caboose window and thought of a small boy of 12 who had left home to help supplement the family income and had never found his way back. Hot tears stung my tanned eyes. I had been routed through Fort Worth, Kansas City, Sioux City, Iowa, Aberdeen, and Elbridge, South Dakota. After leaving Kansas, all the roads were new to me. Sioux City was the third feeding place in the way for a train of cattle. Yay! That is the end of section 1. Now I need to find someone to read. So, who's on? Excuse me. Okay, it doesn't. I wonder if Harp's actually reading now. Yay, Harp's reading. Ouch. So, thank you everyone for coming by tonight, and thank you again for the raid, Pixel Doctor. And we're going to raid Harp Griffin, who is finally back to narrating. So I hope you all have a good night, and hope I will see you tomorrow for Fairy Tales. Good night, everyone.
In the hollow of the night, shadows weave and twist. The wolf has told his stories, wrapped in mystic mist, lurking in the silence where the echoes softly play, the echoes of forgotten tales dimming as they sway. The hours drip like candle wax, slowly melting gold. Lands of frost and twilight, secrets yet untold. The forest breathes a shiver, its ancient heartbeats thrum. Underneath the silver glow, the wild whispers come. Time to close the book, let the pages fall. You've roamed the winding paths, now heed the twilight.